President Muhammadu Buhari impugns World Bank International Monetary Fund data on Nigeria's economy. Senate revisits sexual harassment bill after Sex for Grades documentary. On the international scene, heavy clashes underway at Turkey-Syria border. And in sport, J.J. Okocha, Lagos government settled tax evasion case out of court.
This is ANN News.
I am Olajumoke Olatunji. President Muhammadu Buhari has impugned data from World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and other world bodies on the Nigerian economy. The president said some of the data by the two global financial organizations and other world bodies were wild and inaccurate estimates. He said numbers from local institutions are more reliable. He said figures from the world bodies bear little relation to the fact and ground. He said Nigeria needs to domesticate its policies to reflect its local realities. The World Bank had released a revised forecast for Nigeria's economic growth for this year from 2.1 to 2.0%. The bank had predicted in April that Nigeria's economy would grow by 2.1% for the next 2 years. But in its October report, the World Bank said it has to lower its forecast for Nigeria because a weak macroeconomic policy environment and no policy implementation. Meanwhile, past Kaduna Central Senator Shehu Sani has disagreed with the president's take on the World Bank and IMF assessment of the Nigerian economy. He differed with the government in a tweet in which he wrote that the government cannot, on one hand, demand World Bank money, but on the other hand, dismiss its assessment. A former lawmaker has instead dismissed the president's 2020 appropriation bill presented on Tuesday. Sani said that budget would have no positive effect on Nigerians. Other groups and individuals, such as the Coalition of United Political Parties, the People's Democratic Party, PDP, and Senate Minority Leader Eyinaya Abaribe, had since rubbished the budget. The Senate Minority Leader Eyinaya Abaribe also had some choice words to describe President Buhari's 2020 budget. He called it a budget of taxation. Abaribe, who represents Abia South, says the budget was not sustainable because debt servicing was higher than capital expenditure. Abaribe says lawmakers should look into the budget and stress that the nation was still struggling. Reacting to Abaribe's comment, a former governor of Benue State, now Senator Sozwan, says the lawmakers needed to address the nation's borrowing methodologies. He expressed worry about the deficits and the correspondence borrowing increase. He called on lawmakers to pass legislation to address borrowing. Nigeria's Customs Service has reported its daily haul of 5 billion naira since Nigeria's borders were shut down. The Customs Service is also said to have to owe some of its officers the full special allowances it promised them for border patrol duty. As of August, Customs paid its men and officers these special allowances according to their ranks, almost 400,000 naira for assistant superintendent and about half of that for lower ranks. But the officers and lower cadre workers were jolted in September when those allowances were reduced by 80%. An officer said they were asked to work overtime as a result of the border closures and would be paid those special allowances in lieu. The allowances were to cover feeding, transportation, and other expenses. They were also to safeguard them from temptation to receive bribes. The border closures, which were originally planned for a month, were extended. The officers believe the extension, which may not have been planned, did not have a budget for the allowances. Those who were paid almost 400,000 naira in August received just 70,000 in September. Another officer told newsmen if direction is not given to lower-level operators, the operation to secure the more than 100 illegal entry points around Idiroko alone would fail. The officers want the customs boss to make good on his promise to pay those allowances. Officials of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission have raided the Zamfara state offices of the Independent National Electoral Commission and recovered about 85 million naira in cash. The cash was loaded in 4 Ghana Must gold bags and is believed to be part of the 84.5 million naira ad hoc staff allowances that were allegedly diverted by officials of the commission. INEC officials expected to be the plotters of the diversion and who had been arrested earlier by EFCC were brought back. They were later made to accompany the recovered money and documents back to EFCC custody. EFCC was acting on a petition by a former INEC presiding officer. The decision of the EFCC to arrest about 4 INEC officials were due to a petition written by one Abdullahi Naziru on behalf of all presiding officers that worked for INEC during the 2019 general elections in Zamfara State. Prompted by the sex for grades exposed on BBC Africa Eye earlier in the week, the Nigerian Senate has reintroduced the sexual harassment bill sponsored by Deputy Senate President Ovie Omo-Agege. The bill had been passed in the last Senate, but the House of Representatives did not concur. The bill prescribes a 5-year jail term for lecturers and educators convicted of sexual harassment of their male or female students. The reintroduction of the bill comes 2 days after the BBC documentary. Nigerians say sexual harassment is a norm in the country's universities. The lawmakers will debate the provisions of the bill during second hearing on another legislative day. Coming up, African stories. Medical report says many new mothers in poor countries abused during childbirth. And later, international news. Heavy ground offensive on at Turkey-Syria border.
You are watching ANN.
Dear Mommy, you went out that night with the baby in your tummy, but you did not come back. The baby is very fine and she eats and sleeps a lot. Everyone says that you are in a better place, but I miss you so much. I keep asking them, where is the better place? But nobody answers me. Auntie Kemi just hugs me and says, go and play. Mommy, I miss you. Please, when are you coming home?
I still do miss you, Mom. And in honor of your memory, I'm a doctor today working with the MTN Foundation to save mothers and children every day.
Ending mother and child mortality in Nigeria is dear to us. We will keep strengthening this most important bond just for you.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. Now we check out some African stories. History has been made in the Sudan as the first Christian is appointed to the Transitional Ruling Sovereign Council. Christians in the country say this signals some hope that Christians will get equal rights after decades of oppression under former President Omar al-Bashir. Coptic Christians in the Sudan celebrated in September after the first and only Christian, a Copt, was sworn in as a member of the ruling Sovereign Council. The ethno-religious Copt, who number 500,000, are indigenous to Northeast Africa. They are one of the largest Christian communities in the Sudan. The 11-member council will be in power for only 3 years during the country's transition to elections. But many see the choice of Raja Nicole Isha Abdul Mazar as a positive major shift in the country's politics. A report in the medical journal The Lancet says more than a third of new mothers in 4 poor countries are abused during childbirth. The World Health Organization carried out the study in Ghana, Guinea, Yemen, and Nigeria and found that almost half of the women experience physical or verbal abuse and some form of stigma or discrimination at maternal health facility. The study also found that the facilities carried out a high number of cesarean sections, vagina exams, and other procedures without the patient's consent. 14% of the more than 2,000 women observed for the study said they were hit, slapped, or punched during childbirth. Nearly 40% said they endured verbal abuse by being shouted at, mocked or scolded. Authors of the study have urged officials to hold accountable those who mistreat women during childbirth. They also urged the government to enact policies and sufficient resources to ensure that women have a safe place to give birth. Uganda has unveiled 2 new aircraft as it continues to revamp the national carrier. Those deliveries doubles the airline's fleet. Uganda Airlines hopes the additions will help it expand its route network to cover more destinations across East and Central Africa. Isabel Nakiyo reports.
Uganda's national carrier is spreading its wings. It's purchased 2 new CRJ 900 planes from Canadian manufacturer Bombardier for $28 million each. With a bigger fleet, the airline is expanding its route destinations to Southern and Central Africa.
You can rest assured, knowing that Uganda Airlines is a world-class airline which will exceed customer expectations through high-quality service, global connectivity, and commitment to excellence.
Uganda Airline is currently flying to 5 destinations including Nairobi, Juba, Dar es Salaam, Mogadishu and Bujumbura. Fares on all these routes have been on promotion, with some rates dropping to around $200. The airline says it may take many years, but it expects to break even eventually. The airline says business has been growing and expects to even get better when more routes are added. The government hopes the airline will stay stronger still once it acquires the Airbus planes later in 2020. There is, however, competition from regional airlines like Kenya and Rwanda Airways that fly to some of the same destinations.
Principally, all the routes that we have opened means that we are offering direct flights out of Entebbe to those points. Before we came on board, people were flying via different points. They could spend 6 hours just to get to Dar es Salaam or to get to Bujumbura. Now we take them there 45 minutes, 1 hour, 20 minutes. So they can't look for anything better than that.
The Uganda Airlines was grounded nearly 2 decades ago over financial mismanagement, but took to the skies again just 2 months ago. Now with a fleet of 4 planes, it plans to add 2 new Airbuses A330-800 neo aircrafts next year. The government hopes the revival of the airline will boost trade and promote tourism in the region.
A report in a new Rwandan government newspaper says an American pastor has been deported after being arrested and accused of disturbing the public order. The newspaper quotes immigration authorities as saying the conservative missionary Greg Scoof had overstayed his work permit. He was arrested by police for what they called an illegal meeting with journalists to criticize the government shutdown of his local radio station. The Amazing Grace radio station was banned last year after authorities said it broadcast a sermon that described women as evil. Scoof is also said to have criticized Rwandan authorities on Monday for relaxing restrictions on abortion and teaching about reproductive health in schools. Scoof was said to have asked in a statement whether the Rwandan government was trying to send people to hell. When we return, international news. Heavy ground offensive on at Turkey-Syria border. And later, sport. Okocha, Lagos government settled out of court in tax evasion case.
You are watching ANN.
Whether in your house, at your office, on your phone or online, we are there. We have the facts behind the headlines. We cut to the chase with the news you really need. We cover every angle. We are the bigger, better news network. We are African News Network. ANN. Watch ANN News on MITV from a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. On the foreign scene, Turkey has launched a major military operation around border towns in northeast Syria. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says the offensive, which began with air raids on Tuesday, is focused on removing Kurdish-led forces from the border area and creating a safe zone so millions of Syrian refugees can be returned. The SDF, led by the Kurdish People's Protection Unit, has appealed to the U.S. and its allies for a no-fly zone to protect it from Turkish air attacks. Turkey considers the YPG a terrorist group. President Erdogan has threatened Ankara will send to Europe the 3.5 million Syrian refugees in Turkey if European countries label the country's military operation in Syria as an occupation. Erdogan defended Turkey's incursion into Syria against a wave of international criticism. It said the military operation would support Syria's territorial integrity by confronting the Kurds who control the country's northeast. Italian Foreign Minister Luigi Di Maio has called for an immediate end to the fighting. Maio says Turkey's offensive in Syria is unacceptable. Organizations and world leaders are calling for calm in the ongoing Syria offensive in northeastern Syria. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says any military operation must fully respect the UN Charter and international humanitarian law and protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. UN Security Council's President, South African Ambassador Jeremy Magile also appealed to Turkey to protect civilians and exercise maximum restraint. AU Chief Jean-Claude Juncker demanded that Turkey halts its military operation, telling Ankara the bloc would not pay for any so-called safe zone that might be created. AU's top foreign policy official, Federica Mogherini, also warned that unilateral action on Turkey's part threatens concerted action by the West and Turkey and other countries to defeat ISIL. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg has urged Turkey to show restraint while acknowledging that Ankara had legitimate security concerns. Saudi Arabia says the offensive would undermine the region's security and the battle against ISIL. U.S. President Donald Trump says Turkey's air assault was a bad idea that is not backed by the United States. He called on Ankara to protect religious minorities. And this might be the last straw in the Brexit mess as Prime Minister Boris Johnson holds secret talks with Leo Varadkar today in Brussels in his final chance to break the Brexit deadlock. Just 3 weeks before the United Kingdom is due to leave the world's biggest trading bloc, it is still unclear on what terms it will leave or whether it will become the first sovereign state to depart the European project. AU has accused Johnson of playing a stupid blame game. Johnson is meeting with the Irish leader at an undisclosed location believed to be Liverpool as he faces a desperate race against time to get a deal done by the end of October. Johnson intends to keep Northern Ireland more closely aligned with the EU than the rest of the UK on rules of goods and agriculture, but remove it from the current customs union. The United States and China's top trade negotiators are set to meet for the first time since late July to try to find a way out of the escalating trade war. Chinese Vice Premier Liu Yu, U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin will seek to narrow differences enough to avoid a scheduled rate increase next Tuesday on $250 billion worth of Chinese goods. If negotiations break down again by the middle of December, nearly all Chinese goods imported into the United States, more than $500 billion worth, could be subject to punitive tariffs in the disputes that erupted during U.S. President Donald Trump's time in office. The two sides have been at loggerheads over U.S. demands that China improve protection of American intellectual property and end cyber thefts. Still ahead, sports. J.J. Okocha, Lagos government settled out of court in tax evasion case.
You are watching ANN.
This used to be me. But that was before I got the perfect bag. It's handy and easy to use. All I need in one compact space, just like my MTN Extra Value plan. I used to get one plan for my calls and then try to remember which data plan worked for me. Roaming was a totally different ballgame. Not anymore. I've got the MTN Extra Value all-in-one plan. If you're a data buff like me, you get extra data with some talk time. And if you like to make calls, you get extra talk time with some data. And when I'm abroad, I automatically browse, chat, and call right on the same plan. MTN Extra Value was made just for me.
More of data or calls, whichever one you prefer. MTN Extra Value is made just for you.
We are on the road every day, canvassing throughout Africa for news you really need. We follow this story everywhere, from every corner of Nigeria to the wide African expanse. We bring you what's making headlines. We connect you with news you can use. ANN, African News Network, in a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News in Sport. For the first time in his career, African Games table tennis champion Olajide Omotayo is now in the top 81 in the October World Rankings released on Wednesday by the International Table Tennis Federation. With this, the African Games gold medalist has joined compatriot Aruna Quadri, who maintains his status as the 19th best player in the world. He is now the third best African player in the men's category and one of the highest movers in the latest rankings. A Lagos State prosecutor Y.A. Piton has disclosed that Super Eagles former captain Augustine Okocha, who was accused of income tax evasion in 2017, had finally settled with the Lagos State Internal Revenue Service, LIRS. The task agency says the defendant has visited its offices and reconciled his account. As a result, Justice Adedayo Akintoye has withdrawn the warrant of arrest earlier issued on the defendants. And I'm very sure everybody, especially JJ Okocha, heaved a sigh of relief. That is ANN News this evening. Thank you for joining us. For details on these and other breaking stories, visit our website, annafrica.news. Conversation continues on our social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ANN Africa TV. I am Olajumoke Olatuji. Have a pleasant evening.